Hello class, this is section 3.1, parallel lines, skewed lines, and special angle pairs. Today our learning objective is to be able to identify angle pairs, which will be corresponding, alternate interior, consecutive interior, alternate exterior, and consecutive exterior. So a few quick definitions to start. First, let's talk about parallel lines. I know that you learned about parallel lines in Algebra 1, but we're just going to review what those are. So looking over at this picture on the right, I see a pair of parallel lines. Parallel lines are going to be coplanar lines that do not intersect. Parallel planes. Parallel planes are very similar, except we're talking about planes and not lines. So parallel planes are going to be planes that do not intersect. Then finally, we have skew lines. Now this is probably a new vocab word for you. Skew lines are going to be lines that do not intersect and are not coplanar. So looking at the pictures in the bottom, on the first picture, line ST and line UV are going to be skew lines because they are on different planes and they will never intersect. In the second picture, the line that's on plane A and the line that's on plane B were going to be skew lines because they will never intersect. And finally, on the last picture, lines PQ and UV are the skew lines. Next vocab word is transversal. A transversal is a line that intersects two other lines. So looking over at the picture on the right, line T is going to be the transversal because it's intersecting line N and line M. This transversal is going to create 8 different angles, and I have labeled them here for you. These angles have special names depending on their positions. So before we talk about those special angles, we're going to identify the transversals in each picture. I want to make sure you really know what a transversal is. So looking at the first picture, the transversal is going to be line B. The reason that it's line B is because that's the only line in the picture that's intersecting two other lines. The next picture, the transversal is going to be line M. It's intersecting lines N and K. And then finally, in the last picture, this one is a little bit more tricky, so I'm going to give you a second to look at it. In this picture, all of the lines are transversals because each line is intersecting two other lines. S is intersecting PR, T is intersecting PR, P is intersecting TS, and R is intersecting TS. So how do we show that lines are parallel? Here I'm given two lines and they look like they're parallel, but I don't know that they are unless I'm told that they are. One way to show that lines are parallel is by drawing these little arrows on the lines. Another way to know that they're parallel is that the directions tell you that they are parallel. Never assume that they're parallel. You must be told. Notation is so important. So if I ever ask you to draw parallel lines, make sure that you have this notation. If I ask you a question about parallel lines, make sure they have the notation, otherwise they are not. So now let's talk about those special angle pairs. There are 5 different special angle pairs whenever you're looking at parallel lines cut by a transversal. So notice that all of these different pictures show the parallel lines with the arrows on them. The first special angle pair we're going to talk about are corresponding angles. Corresponding angles are going to be on the same side of the transversal, and here I've shown that they are the angles that are on the top of each parallel line. Now, corresponding angles could also be on the bottom of each parallel line. The relationship between these two angles is that they are congruent. Next, we have alternate interior angles. These are going to be on opposite sides of the transversal. That's where the alternate comes from. And they are going to be on the inside of the parallel lines. That's where the word interior comes from. The relationship between these two angles is that they are also congruent. Next, we have consecutive interior angles. These angles are going to be on the same side of the transversal, which means consecutive. They're like next to each other. And interior means they're on the inside. The relationship between these two angles is that they are supplementary. Alternate exterior angles. These angles are going to be on opposite sides of the transversal and on the outside of the parallel lines. The relationship between these angles is that they are congruent. And then finally, consecutive exterior angles. These are going to be on the same side of the transversal and on the outside of the parallel lines. The relationship between these angles is that they are supplementary. These special angle pairs are so important. You will have to memorize each of these, and I promise that we will do so much practice that you will have these burned into your brain by the time you take the test. Notice that the relationships are always either going to be congruent or supplementary. Just as a side note, consecutive interior and exterior angles may also be referred to as same side interior or same side exterior. I just wanted to let you know that in case you look up any other videos or information. Alright, so let's practice identifying the special angle pairs, starting with corresponding angles. Remember that these have to be on the same side of the transversal, and they also have to both be on the top or both be on the bottom. So, here are our parallel lines, and we have two transversals running through those parallel lines. Since we're looking at special angle pairs, we're only looking at the ones that have to do with the parallel lines specifically. So, starting with this transversal, I see that angles 1 and 5 are on the same side, and they're both on the tops. Angles 4 and 8 are on the same side, and they're both on the bottoms of those parallel lines. 2 and 6 are on the same side, tops. 3 and 7 are on the same side, bottom. There are no corresponding angles over here on this transversal because I'm not given these bottom angles. Alright, alternate interior angles. 4 and 6 are alternate interior angles because they're on the opposite sides and on the inside of the lines. And 5 and 3 are opposite sides of the transversal and on the inside of the parallel lines. Consecutive interior angles. 4 and 5. They're next to each other on the inside of the parallel lines. And 3 and 6 are next to each other on the inside of the parallel lines. Alternate exterior angles, that's going to be 1 and 7 and 2 and 8. Remember that these are on the outside and they're on opposite sides of the transversal. And finally, consecutive exterior angles. 1 and 8 are on the outside on the same side of the transversal, and 2 and 7 are on the outside of the parallel lines and on the same side of the transversal. Just keep referring back to that chart that we did previously that shows you what each of these mean. So now we're going to use the picture to complete each statement. For these, you're going to need to remember the relationships in addition to knowing like what the special angle pair is. So if the measure of angle 5 right here is 130, what's the measure of angle 8? So the measure of angle 8 is going to be 50. Now these two angles aren't any of our special angle pairs. This is just something that we already know. These two angles are a linear pair, which means they're supplementary. Alright, next one. Angle 4 and angle 6. So first I see that these are going to be alternate interior angles. It says angle 4 is 125, So that means angle 6 is going to be 125 because they're alternate interior angles, which means they're congruent. Alright, next one. The measure of angle 4 is 125, and I'm trying to find the measure of angle 8. These are going to be congruent because they are corresponding angles. Next one. The measure of angle 2 is 45, and I'm trying to find the measure of angle 7. Well, I see that these are on the same side and they're on the outside of the parallel lines. So these are going to be consecutive exterior, which makes them supplementary. So the measure of angle 7 is going to be 135 because they are consecutive exterior. The measure of angle 3 is 50. Find the measure of angle 6. Well, the measure of angle 6 is going to be 130 because these are consecutive interior angles. And then the last one for this slide. If the measure of angle 7 is 42, find the measure of angle 1. Well, these two angles are going to be congruent, so the measure of angle 1 is also going to be 42 because they are alternate exterior angles. Now for this, you have the rest of these on your note sheet right now. I want you to pause the video and try the rest of them, and then you can play the video to see the answers. I'm not going to go through and explain these answers, I'm just going to put them up. Alright, hopefully you were able to do those on your notes correctly. If not, please go back to the charts that show what alternate exterior, alternate interior, and all those different angle types are, and refer back to what their relationships are. It can also help you in class if you're still having trouble with this. Alright, moving on. Now we're going to be looking at figures that have parallel lines, and we're going to try to find the variable. So here are my parallel lines and here are my two transversals. These two angles are falling on my left-hand side transversal. What is the relationship between these two angles? Well, these two angles are on the same side of the transversal and they're on the inside of the parallel lines. So these are consecutive interior angles. That means they're going to be supplementary. So I'm going to set up an equation adding these two angles equal to 180. Then I just need to solve this equation to find x. So I combine like terms to get 4x plus 60 is equal to 180. Subtract 60 from both sides to get 4x is equal to 120. And then finally divide by 4 to get x is equal to 30. Alright, next example. Here are my parallel lines, and I have two transversals. I have the transversal on the bottom and the transversal on the right. How do I know these are transversals? Because they are intersecting the two parallel lines. So I'm looking at this angle at the bottom left and this angle right here. First, what is the special angle pair between these two angles? Well, they are both on the right of the parallel lines. I know we didn't talk about this earlier, but if we were to turn our parallel lines over, these would both be on the top, or if you turn it the other way, they would both be on the bottom of the parallel lines. So this is actually going to be corresponding angles, because they're both on the same side of the parallel line, and they're both on the same side of the transversal. So we know that corresponding angles are going to be congruent, so we are going to set these two measures equal. Then we'll subtract x to the other side, add over 20, and then finally divide by 2 to get x is equal to 40. Here's our last example. I want you to try this one on your own. In just a second, I will put up the answer.